Recording in progress.
Should I move over?
There is a seat too. Carol is not crippled.
I should use the stairs.
Okay, yeah, don't,
Get mad at the
Don't
kids
die.
when they jump.
David, are you
Yeah.
gonna turn your phone around so we can see the table?
who is speaking? And who wants to see other people on camera?
The headless horseman.
There's death by irony here. All right, we'll get that going for you, Karen, in the box in the top left corner.
Well, not that we didn't want to see two of you, you know, because I have a big you and a little you. Now I have three of you. I'm very confused.
Well, it's
Do you-
upsetting.
Isaiah, do you know
There we
everyone here? To do some intros? It's Carol,
Hi, Carol.
this is Norma,
Weird.
Hello.
and you guys know Ben, Norma, Ben? Yeah, yeah.
Oh, look at all the people.
Ah,
And online, you know.
Full
Jen,
house.
Karen,
Excellent.
that's David's mom.
Karen's a little hard to
That
see.
backdrop shaking is kind of a trippy.
Oh,
And
yeah,
you guys,
yeah.
feels like the room's moving.
yeah. Does somebody want to be the camera person tonight? All you have to do is point it at the person speaking, and you don't need to point it at me because I got a camera on me. There you go. All right. Here we go. Set that down. Yeah, so welcome Isaiah, our newest member.
Yeah.
So we have now completed The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, Mere Christianity. And we have done the first half, assuming we've read it, of The Horse and His Boy. So tonight we're kind of looking at the first 8 chapters. So chapter 1, and I have more of these sheets. Does anybody need me to print a copy or two? If it's helpful, I can, but you're good. Okay, then, chapter 1
Do
is.
you have a PDF? Sorry, Dave, do you have a PDF or something of the sheet that, I don't, did you send
Oh.
it out?
No, all it is blank lines for people to make notes on under
Oh,
chapter headings.
Okay.
Yeah,
That's fine.
but I do post, like, I kind of make prompts for myself, and I do post that when I have that up on the website. So if you're ever wanting some notes, that's no problem. So chapter 1 is how Shasta set out on his travels. Shasta. So, was there anything that stood out to you in chapter 1 that you want to make mention of?
It's like a comic book.
I love this story. I was saying to Carol on the way over, I really do like this story. Okay, well, I have some stuff that will help us facilitate conversation. So we have this longing for the north. Shasta does not have any interest in south. He's been to the south, south, been there, done that. So what do you think the significance is of the north? What is this longing that he has? What is Lewis trying to communicate? If he's trying to communicate anything.
The more adventure, the unknown,
The unknown, okay, yeah. Definitely,
adventure, excitement.
yeah.
It's longing, is that maybe it, sort of that indwell, like there's got to be more than this
The
to
longing,
this world?
yeah.
The concept of longing or?
Yeah,
something more?
Yeah. So that's really good. What we'll see later with things like Surprised by Joy is Lewis has an idea that we have moments of joy in our lives, things that transcend the moment of what's actually happening. So you might see a sunset or hear a piece of music, and you could see a sunset just as good a second time. You could hear that same piece of music a second time, and it doesn't have that same impact. But there are these moments in our lives that have these little sparks of joy. And for Lewis, that is moments of heaven invading us. And it creates this longing that alerts us, similar to the moral law from Mere Christianity, that we were made for another world. That because just like our appetite for food or for sex has a proper fulfillment, this longing for this joy to have this more must also have this proper fulfillment. And if it can't be found here in this world, then it must belong to another world. So that's part of what's happening, I think, in this longing for the north. And we see this in a few places, right? Anything you want to talk about that? Oh, if you hear noises, we have Al-Anon meets in the West Wing on Wednesday night, so don't worry about that.
Well, the thing that struck me was, St. Augustine talks about a restlessness that we have and an
Yes.
emptiness
Yes,
that only God can fill.
right.
So that sort of reminded me of that.
Good. That's a great connection. Our hearts are restless until they find rest in thee, O Lord, says St. Augustine in his Confessions. Very nice. Good
And there's
connection.
that thing about the God-shaped space.
The God-shaped space, yes.
Right.
Yes, that's
Seems to
right.
be kind of a common thing.
Yeah, yeah. Très bien. Well, as the story progresses, there's normal story details, not, he writes allegorically, but this is not a written allegory. So there are things that he wants to say, but not everything has a one-to-one meaning. So there are just details of a story and the way a story needs to move forward. But I thought it was interesting. Shasta didn't know that it was wrong for him to listen at doors. So he sat and he overhears this conversation. So I found that interesting. Why is it wrong to listen at doors?
I don't think it is.
You don't think it is? Okay.
No, I don't. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But it struck me that it's part of an old moral code.
Right. That's certainly part of Lewis's moral code.
Mhm.
We see it again in Voyage of the Dawn Treader, when Lucy goes into the magician's house and she stands at the magician's book and she uses magic to hear what her friends are saying and think about her. And Aslan comes and says, you know, it's wrong to eavesdrop on others, even by magical means.
Kind of an invasion of space,
Vision of space.
personal
Yeah.
space. and-
Yeah. Certainly some ideas around privacy. Did you?
When the door is closed, though, the people inside have this feeling that it's a private
Right?
conversation.
Yes.
So if somebody's listening, it's not private.
Yes. Yeah.
anymore, right?
In Mere Christianity, we looked at some virtues, particularly chapter 3. Would that, the idea of listening or not listening, fit with any of his ideas about virtues? Another way to put it is, what might be wrong with listening at doors? What would be problematic with that in Lewis's mind?
I wonder if you're hearing, you might be hearing things that you're not ready to hear,
Okay,
right? And
Yeah.
not be prepared or skilled or have the tools to handle what you're going to hear.
so developmentally,
Development.
yeah, yeah.
But if Shasta hadn't listened, he would never have escaped.
Right. So again, we've got that sense of
This,
there is a world outside of the world of the text, and Shasta listens because Lewis needs him to listen because it moves the story forward. Yeah. What about integrity? What about honesty? Is there any sense in which listening at doors would violate integrity and honesty? at least from Lewis's perspective.
Well, I wonder what the why is behind it. Like, there might be reasons where you do not feel safe.
Mhm.
And it's almost like a survival piece.
Yeah.
That you feel like you need to know some information in order to move forward.
Right. Yeah.
Versus, if you feel safe and you feel fine,
Yeah.
then it's just curiosity and
Yeah.
you're
Yep. Yes. I wonder if it might be related too with the whole idea of governance, that parents are over children for their well-being and benefit, and a child to then listen to something that parents have determined isn't for them might be part of the violation of that natural order.
So he, in fact, Lewis is poking at the way Shasta's been raised. And he's poking at his lack of
Certainly could be,
parenting in
yes.
his
Yeah.
life.
I think, and to some degree, similar to Marilla Cuthbert, there's a sense of passing on some basic morality and things to think about, right? Children shouldn't listen at doors. It's okay to disagree with him. We just want to consider what it is that he's trying to do. Because again, he has goals in writing books for children that are addressed to children. It's for their benefit and well-being. Even the adventure story, we'll notice that in certain places, when Shasta thinks about traversing the desert by himself, Lewis, as the author, speaks to you and me as children and says, Shasta didn't have the opportunity to read the right kinds of books. So he doesn't know that trying to do that is a death sentence. He's going to do it all the wrong way because he didn't read the right kind of books. So Lewis is writing to children. So he is communicating something to them as well. And he's doing that from a different world, right? A different time, a different place. And yes, a different worldview, different philosophy of the day. And then we have this part in the rehearsal of Ashish's story, that it is the design of the gods that this child came up on shore this night when he couldn't sleep and was sitting outside. Talk about that. What did you think about that? For me, it's on page 15. And it says, and shortly after the tide brought to the land a little boat in which there was nothing but a man lean with extreme hunger and thirst, who seemed to have died but a few moments before, for he was still warm, and an empty water skin and a child still living. Doubtless, said I, these unfortunates have escaped from the wreck of a great ship, but by the admirable designs of the gods, the elder has starved himself to keep the child alive and has perished in sight of land. So let me just draw to your attention something that Lewis says in Mere Christianity. The fact that you're a Christian doesn't mean that you have to believe that all other religions aren't true, or that within those religions isn't some truth. So Ashish, we'll find out later in the story, just, I don't know if I'm assuming at this point, maybe you've read the whole story at some point in your life, so you might already know, it's Aslan that brings the boat to shore in time for Ashish to find it, right? So Ashish is saying something that's true, even though he has in mind something different. It wasn't the will of the gods, the will of God. And again, Lewis is pointing us to something that we need to know about, right? There's a lot of accidental things that happens in this story that are not so accidental. And so the working of providence with divine purpose is a part of this story. So we were reading Lord of the Rings. There's a point when Gandalf says to Frodo, if Bilbo was meant to have that ring, that's hopeful because that indicates there is something behind this who means you have the ring. And then that provides us with some hope that there is actually a will that's bigger than just the happenstance of events that we are in the midst of. Well, and then we have another little moral for kids. How did Bree, the horse, get where he is?
He disobeyed his mother.
Right? That's right. He did.
Don't disobey your mother.
My mother
Or
had
pay the
set boundaries for me,
Yes.
and I went beyond those boundaries. And in this case, it's similar to fairy stories, right? Why did we tell our children fairy tales for all those years? Fairy tales communicated to children how to live safely in the world that was around them. Don't go into the big black forest. There may be a hungry witch in there. Or a bear or a wolf. Like, you just don't know what you're gonna get on what day. And then the last thing I want to say in chapter 1 is there's certainly a vein of colonialism going on, sense of civilization, that again, we saw in Mere Christianity. It has an underlying tone of racism. Now, to some degree, Lewis has never been to places like the Middle East, so he is drawing on stories, Alibaba and the 40 Thieves, to create a picture, to create a type of culture. It's obviously meant to echo things like some Hindu, some Muslim cultures. So we want to, again, we want to be charitable in how we judge Lewis, because history is also going to judge us. He's a product of his time. So we just need to be aware of that and read that with a grain of salt. But it does also communicate a conviction that he talked about. Some morality is better than others, right? When we look at some of the cultural manifestations of any culture, we make judgments about it, right? If we were to look at a culture that says young girls are not allowed to go to school because they should only be brought up to raise children and stay in the home, we would probably say about that culture that is further from the truth than we are, right? And so again, we have that sense of standard that has to be there, says Lewis, in Mere Christianity. We're saying something is better or worse, then it has to be better or worse than an actual thing. So while there is some colonialism, some racism in here, he does want to say that a culture can be closer to the truth than other cultures. Now, how they get there is a whole different conversation. Don't look at that clock. It won't help us at all. 7:22. All right. Well, in chapter 2, we have a wayside adventure. So we have to begin with the question, what is adventure? This is an adventure story. So we need to know what it is that we're reading. How do you understand adventure?
Something exciting coming.
Yeah, I was just gonna
something
say,
exciting, okay?
Not dull.
Not dull, okay?
Leaving your known environment to go
Whoa.
somewhere
Yes.
new or strange.
So are adventures always pleasant things?
No,
No. You think of some other modern day adventures that you might have read about that would help us understand adventure?
From your comfort zone, like new job or whatever.
Yeah, absolutely. Harry, Hermione, and Ron looking for Horcruxes. It's an adventure. Yeah, so, and often it is related to growth, right? So you think of a Bilbo or Frodo Baggins, they start off as fat and lazy largely. But by the end, they are trimmed down. They are wiser, they are more skilled and capable, more confident, less afraid. And their world has broadened, they've gotten bigger, they know more, their, life has deepened. So one of the reasons why Lewis talks about this type of book being the right kind of book is because this in itself is a form of adventure, right? If he can create convincing characters, Aravis, Shasta, Brehwin, and we can go on a journey with them, then to some degree, we too are learning, we too are adventuring, we too, to some degree, are leaving the comforts of our home on an adventure. So again, it's just really important to ask what a thing is, no matter what that thing is. If it's a corkscrew or a cathedral, what is it and what is it there for? What is this? What is it here for? So with that in mind, then, what do you think Shasta's physical state represents in this chapter? What is his physical state to begin with?
He's hurting.
He's hurting, yeah. And why is he hurting?
Never ridden a horse before.
Yeah, so just a muscle ache of
Yeah.
riding a horse, that thumping up and down. Sounds like he had some pretty nasty falls because he's not an experienced rider, so he doesn't know how to fall. And then he has spent the night on the ground. So that we already set the tone for what an adventure is right there. So this physical state and its progression, what does that tell us about adventures?
That it's not always fun.
Not always fun, yeah. And there's development,
Yeah.
right? The same way that as the best thing for Shasta to do is to continue to ride that horse, right? His body will grow accustomed, his muscles will strengthen. He will be less bruised, less sore, less falls, less out of control. So yeah, there's this progression. Then we come to this conversation about the saddlebags and the money in them. We'll use that money to purchase some supplies. Shasta asked the simple question, isn't that stealing? So talk about Shasta's question, talk about Bree's response as he thinks about it and replies.
Well, it's a moral tweak or a game.
Say it again.
You rename something.
You
so it's
rename
okay.
something. Okay,
So you rename it booty or spoil, then it's all right.
okay,
That's the product of war.
okay,
And so that makes it okay.
okay. So again, in Mere Christianity, remember that he talks about not everything is right or wrong all the time. There is a time where it's right to lay with a person and bear children, but it's not always right to do that. There are times where it's definitely wrong to do that. And there's other examples, right? There's times to stand and fight, and there's times to walk away. So it seems to me that here we have an illustration of that principle, that yes, ordinarily this would be stealing, but in these circumstances, when you've been taken captive, you're in enemy territory, and you're seeking to get home into your freedom, that while it doesn't nullify the act of stealing, within this context, this is permissible, but only within this context. I mean, once they get home, you can't then just say, this is spoil or booty, right? Then once again, it is stealing. But within this context, it's all right. And we think about something like war, right? It's not okay for us to kill each and every day. But there may be occasions where it is permissible, and maybe even if we're thinking of a World War II, where it might be the best thing to do is take up arms and fight. That's not me, that's Lewis. We can have another conversation about pacifism and all that kind of stuff another time, but I wanted to raise that and just say, so here's an example of that principle that Lewis has. So it's not that stealing ever becomes okay or lying ever becomes okay, but there may be circumstances where it is better to not tell the truth or to take something in order to ensure your survival than to simply lay down and die or destroy yourself. So he pushes away from a black and white morality that a lot of Christians, a lot of especially evangelicals would tend to have, right? And we've talked about it in our series on heroes, women heroes of the Bible. We saw quite a few examples, the midwives who did not obey the orders to kill the newborn boys and defied the Pharaoh and lied to him about it so that they wouldn't be killed over it. So it doesn't nullify, it's not a right to bear false witness. And it doesn't nullify that lying as a practice is not a good practice. You know, truth telling is the virtue, but there may be circumstances where it's better to not tell the truth. And again, World War II was a wonderful example of that, as the Gestapo sought out Jews that were in hiding, and there were people who lied to protect the lives of those Jews. So now, as we continue to get to know Bree's character, Bree the horse, is there anything that you are seeing develop and thinking, oh, this could be a problem?
His self, like how anxious he is about what Shasta says about looking funny in the right
Yeah,
word.
yeah,
This
yeah.
idea that he has this idea of what he should or shouldn't do, and this image and
Right.
what a free horse is, because he's never lived with one. And
That's right.
there's like this confidence. And
Yeah. And we see that a bit later too, right? When they want to go into Tashban and they suggest that they cut his tail raggedly. Madam, have you thought about what we would look like walking into Narnia like that? So if we were going to name that character possibly Flaw, what would we say about that?
Pride immediately jumps to mind.
Pride?
Pride.
I think that is what we've got. So there seems to be some rightful natural pride in certain circumstances. When Shasta says, when the Tisroc is named, shouldn't you say, may he live forever? And Bree says, I'm a free horse of Narnia. I don't have to say that superstitious nonsense. Even if I did say it, it's not going to make him live forever. So there seems to be a proper sense of pride, of knowing who I am and who I'm not, and not pretending to be something I'm not. But yeah, then there seems to be a bit of a, how am I going to look to others becomes a central concern in several places. That maybe is going to be problematic. And again, if we think back to Mere Christianity, or if we think to Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe and Edmund, pride may be a problem for Bree down the road. Last thing I want to say, has everybody read this whole story at some point in their life? Okay, so then I'm not spoiling anything. So we know from later that there's only one lion, but they clearly hear two lions because, of course, this is Aslan pushing the two horse and riders together, right? So that they'll travel together from here on in. This is part of a physical representation of Lewis's idea of the Trinity. One lion, two lions. And if we take the cat into account, then we do have a third manifestation as well. Again, we spent some time last week talking about Lewis's idea of the Trinity. So there's some connections there. So then in chapter 3, we have, sorry, I should just give us a chance. Chapters 1 and 2, anything else stand out that you want to talk about or probe into anything that we've said so far?
Is this a chapter where Shasta actually got a clause in the back? Or is that further?
That is a little ways down, Shasta among the tombs in chapter 6.
Oh, okay, that's further.
Yeah.
I just thought that was interesting because
Yeah.
you gotta have a little pain, you know.
Yeah.
That was you.
But we
You
can
did
talk about that
today.
now if you want.
No, I
Okay.
thought it was here in this one. It's-
Okay, yeah.
I love the image, actually, just right at the beginning of the chapter in page 24. The air, the sense that he's getting away from that smell of fish,
Yeah.
and the air is lovely now to him. You know, I just like that, that this new air was so delicious,
Mhm.
and all his old life seems so far away. Isn't that beautiful?
You can see the hope rising
Yes.
Yeah.
in where he's going on his adventure.
Mhm.
And of course, smelling fish can be gross.
Right.
Anyway,
Especially if you smell it every day,
Yeah.
right?
If you smell like it. Well, that's good.
Sorry,
That's a good
salmon.
observation.
No.
But I think it's a good observation in the sense that there's like falling off the horse and he's having to figure those pieces out, but then you have the air, like
Yeah.
you need those moments of hope to kind of keep going in the
Right.
adventure.
Right.
Otherwise, you'd be like, oh, may as well go back from with the
Right.
fishy smell
Yes,
versus keeping going in the adventure as hard as it might be.
right. Very good. Yeah, signs of hope. Very nice.
And isn't that why the Israelites stayed in the desert so long?
Mm-hmm.
Because they were longing for what was they had before, because they didn't really have that
Okay.
hope,
Okay, so we got this Exodus
right?
imagery here. That's nice.
So I was just reading it.
Well, that was good. I like it. Yeah. That sense of going back.
Mhm.
Yeah.
It's a good example of like in your adventure, you're learning and there's development, right? When the more you learn, you don't want people to want what's behind you. You want to keep growing, keep learning,
Mhm.
moving forward. And the more you do that, you realize, oh, I don't think it would be good going back. It wouldn't feel good to go back.
Right.
You need to develop, I guess.
Yeah. This is good stuff. I like it. So in chapter 3, we get to know Aravis. Archina. And what do you think of Aravis? What kind of character does she have?
I like that she's descended from the god of Tash,
Mhm.
god Tash.
Yes.
Sometimes that's my nickname. So.
But you're not a god.
No, I'm
No,
not a god.
no.
Well, there's a contrast between her and Bree, because Bree doesn't know what his background is. He
Mm.
just has a very vague sense of who he might be. And she's real clear. I mean, this is genealogy,
Mhm.
you know, decades of people who were eminent.
Yes,
And,
one might think this was a curated list.
yes. It's also very much like a fairy tale because the stepmother dislikes him.
Right?
The father's dippy, but the reality of that.
Right?
Even with the horses and her, there's again that interplay of sort of where pride like carries them and is good and a positive.
Yeah.
Carries it forward, and yet where it's also their Achilles heel.
Right. Yeah. So for Aravis, is there a particular thing that you would point to that you're seeing as problematic?
Hard to help each other or build trust when there's kind of always this like, well, I'm based on birth, I'm here, you're there, so why should I?
So class.
Class, yes.
Yeah. And forgetting the other word for it, but yeah, that sense of superiority, of
Yes.
breeding, of birth, of position, even of
Caste,
the gods. Sorry?
I think caste might be the
Caste.
other word you're looking
Yes,
for.
thank you. That was it. Yeah. Yeah. And what results from that blind spot?
Unwillingness to listen unless they've by cast, they're in a
Right.
position where you should listen to them, so you'll miss hearing.
Yeah.
This relationship with people who
Yeah.
could offer something.
David Schuhart is connecting to audio. No, don't do that. Is she on my phone? Oh, you're on my phone.
Might have pressed something.
Don't connect to audio. That's okay. Yeah, that's great. So of course, this sense of class or caste comes into play as she tells her story, particularly for the servant girl. And it's interesting. Why does Shasta say anything? Why does he say something about, well, what about the servant girl? What happened to her?
I think it's because he associates with her. Right? Because
Yeah.
that's how he's kind of grown up
Yeah,
as the slave.
he's in the
And
slave
so
caste.
he's empathizing with, well, what's happening to her?
Mhm. And why can he empathize, but Ervis can't?
Because of her pride in the caste system, right?
Right.
Because she expects to be above her, right?
Yeah.
And has known her longer and who she is,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
Whereas,
So again, her class seems to have some positive. I mean, she knows herself, she knows what she wants, and she's unwilling to settle. And so she's going to take risk. She's on her own adventure. So it's not just Shasta that's having an adventure. And we're not just having an adventure through Shasta. We are also adventuring through Aravis to some degree. But it also, Achilles heel is a great name for it. She is blind to those who she sees as beneath her, right? So she can't empathize at all. I mean, that girl might get a beating, but I'm glad because she's a tool of my stepmother kind of thing. And this, of course, is potentially ruinous for this company, right? If this company is being pushed together, then some of Aravis's natural tendencies are also pulling it apart. So she is, to some degree, part of the crisis that is in the midst of the story. And so then we have this section on their making a plan for the for getting through Tashbaan. What do you think that Lewis is trying to communicate to his readers about these plans? I know there's a vague kind of a question.
It's kind of like a muster point.
Muster point, okay, yeah.
I was fascinated when I moved to Regina by these muster point signs all over everywhere. And thought for quite a while, what on earth were they about? And then asked, and somebody said, well, that's where everybody, the one outside the plaza where I live, there's a muster point. Nobody's told me in the apartment that's where I'm to go if there's an emergency. And I must say that out into the open in the middle of nowhere does not seem to me to be the safest place to go in an emergency.
Might if your building's falling down.
Well, yes, the building's falling down at where it seemed to be, however, somebody else. So there's some visioning armed robbers and things. But a point at which you'll all come back together and there will be some safety.
Okay, so the tombs, gathering at the tombs.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It'll be a safe place. They all know if they all
Yeah.
get separated, they all can get back there and they'll be safe there.
yeah.
What's your question?
I asked, what is the wisdom that Lewis might be trying to pass on to his readers with the plans that are being laid in the story here?
So at every halt, they argued and argued about what they were to do.
Right,
They couldn't decide,
right,
and they put it off.
okay.
They put it off. Till it could be put off no longer.
We had humbly pointed out that the real problem was not where they should go when they had got through Tashbaan, but how they would get through it.
Right. So talk about that a little bit. What were the options? What did they settle on?
Disguise.
Disguise, yeah, that's where they settled.
Be open. Disguised in crowded areas.
Yeah, crowded areas, good. So my own thing, I don't know that Lewis is trying to say something very specific, but, you know, one, we have the characters thinking through the options together, right? There's a conversation. Should we cross the river? Can we swim? Can we go around the city? And, you know, there's reasons why that won't work. Can't go around it. Can't go that way. You know, what are our options? We're down to needing to go through. And then how do we do that, right? So there is a sense of some systematic thinking. But I wonder too if there's a sense of needing to face things head on, certain things. And again, we can't be too universal because we'll see a little later where there's an opportunity to fight against a potential siege. And that is, no, we won't do it that way. We will do it a different way. We'll kind of, I don't know if that's part of what he's doing, but I think it's part of his, if he's writing an instruction manual to children on how to have adventures, when you get into the situation, you know, think about, well, how do we get through this, right? How do we think clearly, carefully about these sorts of things? How do we discuss these with other people? Like I said,
Weighing your options.
Yeah.
That's what life is too, isn't it?
yes. And sometimes, like as Wynn says, I know it's not a good plan or not a very good plan, but it is the best plan that we have. That's the plan that we have to go with, right? I just thought it was interesting. Well, anything else in chapter 3 that you wanted to talk about? Chapter 4. Shasta falls in with the Narnians. So we've talked about Bree's character. We've talked about Aravis's character. What do we notice about Shasta's character as we come into this chapter 4?
He's easily impressed.
Okay.
young.
Easily impressed, he's young. And so what part of the story are you thinking
Well,
of?
he sees the beauty of the city and it's glittering and glistening and his eyes are attracted to all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And then later on, he gets further up into the city and he sees the reality is it isn't glittering. But when he gets back from it again, he just sees the glitter.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, he's wearing rose
Colored glasses.
Colored glasses,
Yeah.
okay. Which might be part of you know, a lonely boy from a hut in a small fishing village off in the side, seeing the city for the first time. Could be pretty mind blowing. I was thinking the part right at the beginning, as they're trying to get in, and some of the guards shout and say, "Hey, horse boy, you'll catch it if your master finds you've been using his saddle horse for pack work." And Shasta replies, "It's my master's order." So there.
Yeah.
And then proceeds to get a boxing in the ears.
He's a street kid.
Shasta cried only a very little. He was used to hard knocks.
Yeah.
For myself, I was just trying to, you know, I think about character. I'm not sure how well developed Shasta's character is at this point. Seems to be a certain sulkiness, you know, refuses food because he didn't want Aravis and Wynn to join. He and Bree seemed to be a certain sulkiness about getting up when he was so sore. And then that kind of, it's my master's order, so there, like, I just kind of thought, what's wrong with this kid?
He's a kid.
Where's his ability for self-protection here?
So you didn't like Shasta very much, is what you're saying?
No, I don't think I'm saying that.
It's just. his
I'm trying to
progression.
figure him out. I mean, to some degree, I'm a survivor in my own nature. So learning how to get through potentially dangerous situations by guarding the way I look, the way I speak, the world I grew up in could be pretty dangerous. I've had people threaten me because I've looked at them. So it just kind of prepares you for life. So that's probably part of my own thinking around Shasta. But again,
He was like trying to put on, I think, like, he was trying to lead, but Bree was the one who was leading, but he was
Right.
like, he was trying to play a role.
okay,
Might have seen that through
Yeah.
other people that, well, this is how you gotta show. You gotta
Okay.
show that I'm leading, but I don't have the smarts to do this.
right.
So he's kind of, he's pretending,
Yeah,
but why is he doing that? To
Yeah.
try to impress others or
Yeah.
put on a
There's
persona
certainly-
that,
yeah.
oh, I know what I'm doing, but I
Yeah.
don't. But
and there's certainly he's unformed, he's raw, right? I mean, he's had no love in his life. He's only been treated as a slave, not allowed to think for himself. This is the first time that he's encountering the world. So he's learning lots of stuff. And maybe this is just part of that learning curve. It's pretty steep when you're walking into a city.
That whole image of him drinking that delicious sherbet
Yes,
or lying on anything that's like he's never imagined lying on anything so comfortable.
right. Yeah.
Poor guy.
And yet quickly that beautiful city starts to seem not
yeah. not
quite as
super-
splendid as it
Yeah.
appeared from the outside.
Right.
like a tube.
Really
Yes.
fast. Again, that
Yeah,
kind
yeah,
of unformed.
Yes, good. Maybe getting away from his foster or adopted father. He thought that he was safe now, or, he knows better.
He has a different moral code.
Okay,
He has the moral code of a street kid,
okay,
not the moral code of the nice middle class kids who've read the right books.
right.
So it's kind of getting established as a contrast
Yes,
because he's take what you can get.
right,
Don't tell them the truth because this is so comfortable.
right.
Get away with as much as you can, and it only is a problem if you get caught. So it's a very different kind of morality.
Yes. And there's a contrast in his thinking that we'll see Shasta among the tombs, right? He has the assumption that Aravis has probably left. There's this moment where he just thinks about going with the Narnians, and the narrator says, I'm sorry to say Shasta didn't think what would have happened to the real Prince Corin if he had done that. So where Aravis doesn't see certain things because of her class, Shasta doesn't see things because of his class. So both of them create gaps, have holes. I think that's good to note.
Is there an element throughout this story, we kind of run back in the pride stuff, like C.S. Lewis's take on child development or child character formation, the idea of virtue and stuff, kind of, is this a bit of his story to tell the story of what?
So I would want to be careful. I don't think Lewis, we were talking to him, I don't think he would want to say, I sat down and wrote these for child development in a very holistic way. I think he wrote these stories for children. And again, in more of a moralistic kind of way. I think I've sprinkled things in there that is good for people to know. And children are people. and children are being formed, and this can be a contribution to formation. If being virtuous is good, then being virtuous is good at any age, and learning to be virtuous, whether you're young or old, is good now. So I think he is trying to pass along a vision of virtue, and similar to what we talked about with Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. So his thing is, when you write for children, you want clear distinction between good and evil, and you want to write in such a way that the child is on the side of good and not evil. So I think that he's trying to do that same thing with deeds, with thoughts, with virtues, with disposition, that there are good ways of being and not good ways of being. To not think about somebody else because of your class, or because you're just, you want to live out a fantasy. Those are both not virtuous, not good, not just. And so while, we talked about earlier, truth telling and that kind of stuff, truth telling is still important. So we have this moment when he says, Prince Corin feels angry in chapter 5. What else do you think I would tell him? Like, why do you think I would lie? So yeah, I think he wants to contribute to child development only that far. He's not trying to raise children because he recognizes he's a bachelor and he doesn't have experience with that. He has his own story. He knows what he valued as a child growing up. He's got this idea of virtue and things, again, that contributed to him. So he loved the Renaissance, medieval literature like the Fairy Queen. And so for him, there are books that are the right books that help children grow and form right character. So he's trying to write a book that will contribute to that, will be a part of that literary corpus.
But he has kind of an objective view. When you look at what the professor provided for the children, they had beds in a room and they had a playroom, but there was nobody tucking them in that first night.
Right.
And the next day he just said, well, now you've eaten your breakfast, go and play.
Yeah.
That somehow children are supposed to develop on their own.
Yeah.
With just a little sort of guideposts along the way. Or,
Yes. And again, that I think both of those things are a product of his own raising, right? I think his mom died pretty early and his dad was not, it was not overly close relationship. Lewis himself hated school, and boarding school was part of the education in Britain that he was a part of. He hated that, convinced his father to send him to a tutor, and he went and lived with the tutor who was not mothering at all. So very much go and explore. So I think there's some Britishness about that. I think there's some of Lewis's own story. And I think quite a bit of what he valued. I think Lewis appreciated that. He was very imaginative and creative, and he and his brother spent a lot of time playing together, developing worlds like Narnia together, reading and writing and learning. Those were all interests for him. So yeah, he's probably got kids in mind that look a lot like him, function a lot like him. So it certainly isn't going to hit everybody. But yeah, again, I think he's trying to not do child development so much as write the right kind of books for children.
Yep.
So all throughout this, and we see this in chapter 4, we have poems from the Clorman culture that are quoted quite a bit. The poets say, this poet says, that poet says. And then as we meet the Narnians, we hear all sorts of proverbs being said. So just talk about poems and proverbs. How do they function? What's being communicated here? I mean, this is far more than what we saw in Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe.
Both are indirect. Both a poem and a proverb need interpretation. They're not
Right.
direct ways of passing along
Yes.
an idea.
Yeah.
Or truth.
Good. Karen, do you have any thoughts on the poems and the proverbs?
You tell Bob to leave me alone.
I'm not sure what you're referring to. He said he just wanted to make sure you're awake. So, most religions, including Christianity, which adopts the Hebrew Bible as its scripture, does make use of poems, poetry, and proverbs because they're usually short, pithy, and easy to memorize. So you'll notice these folks aren't carrying around a big book. And so many cultures to this day, African culture quite a bit relies on proverbs to communicate the wisdom, situational wisdom. So in that way, it works very much like fairy tales, stories that are easy to memorize, that are compelling, and they're situational. And of course, there again is this desire on Lewis's part to compare and contrast. If you look at the Calormean poets, use very flourishing language, seems to be lot of room, like more room for interpretation. There seems to be more overlap in terms of it's almost a negotiating tool rather than wisdom. It's how can I find the right poet that is going to get me the most in this situation? Whereas the Narnian proverbs are just you don't know the bear till you're in his den kind of thing, just that it's almost so obvious. And so I think as a part of what Lewis is doing, he's just trying to do some comparing and contrasting. But at the end of the day, there is wisdom in both. And again, I think this is part of he wants you on the side of good, right? So one is kind of winsome, the other is kind of frustrating. Now, something really interesting happens in chapter 4. It is exclaimed by the name of Aslan. And what happens when Aslan's name is named in that room? Then in the name of Aslan, said Susan, let us leave Tashband this very day. So, Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. Mr. Beaver mentions Aslan is on the move. What happened?
Things started changing.
Yeah. But in the immediate
Winter ended.
winter ended, yeah. from the reality that Aslan was on the route, but in the naming, Mr. Beaver said that he named Aslan for the first time. And Lewis says, or the narrator says, and something curious happened to the children. Peter, Lucy, and Susan feel a sense of excitement, like the summer holiday, that feeling you get on a warm spring day. And Edmund felt a sense of dread. So Aslan is named for the first time. Shasta hears the name and he feels what? Trick question. He doesn't feel anything. Nothing is said. That sense of awe that we experience, that the speaking of Aslan's name seems to be limited to Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. As I was thinking about that, because that was another author that pointed that out to me as I was preparing, I thought, I wonder if that sense of pull is now Narnia itself is mediating the presence of Aslan, the governance of Aslan. So Aslan is, in this story, is not coming to establish a kingdom. The kingdom is established. Peter is the high king. This is in the golden age. So this is within the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. This story is happening. So Aslan and his governance, the kingdom, is already established. So the thing that Shasta and Bree and Wynn and Erebus are longing for is not Aslan for himself necessarily, but the mediated presence of Aslan through Narnia. Does that make sense? I think that's part of what's behind the longing to go north, to get to Narnia. And we have that phrase repeated all throughout the story, Narnia in the north. The Narnians say it, Bree says it, Wynn says it. It becomes a mantra over and over again. So even though Aslan doesn't seem to be present, Aslan is present because his presence, his governance is being mediated or channeled through these kings and queens of Narnia. Make sense? You see Ben's wheels are turning, so I want to give him a second if he's about to break out with something. It's okay. All right. So then we have in chapter 5, Prince Corin. And we have this false pretenses. Some degree we've talked about this, but I want to bring it home here. So they come up with this idea. How are they going to escape this situation? I mean, they can face this bad boy head on. They've got some swords, they've got some people, it's a defensible place, but in the long run, they can't hold out of a siege. I mean, they're in the middle of an entire city, they're cut off from their country. News of a battle couldn't even get there. You know, maybe the crow could fly, but it doesn't sound like there's resources in all of Narnia to invade and to rescue them, and they wouldn't be able to hold out that long. So they come up with this idea of, you know, again, they're thinking through, how do we resolve this situation? We can't fight our way out, and we do want to live. What can we do? Take it step by step. We need to get to the ship. We need to be allowed to get to the ship, and we need to be allowed to bring supplies on, because it's too big a journey to just get on the ship and sail. They'll die on sea. So they come up with a plan. Let's make it seem like we are interested in this wedding proposal. We're going to lead this dude on, who is a little loose. And we're going to, buy up all of these things, go in the market, make a big show. And that will get us on our boat, and under the cover of night, we can go. So why is this escape under false pretenses seemingly considered virtuous here? I mean, isn't this lying? Isn't this sly?
We're asking how to save the honor of the queen and our own lives out of this devilish city.
Okay.
So there's the higher virtue of the honor
Okay. Honor of our queen. Yeah,
and the evil of the city.
right. Okay. So we are in, similar to Bree and Shasta,
Yeah.
we are in enemy territory.
Yeah.
So, and we're in a disadvantaged situation. So some new rules may apply here.
This seemed like an easy slope of, well, we're not home.
Yeah.
Jesus come and not returned, or not fully come
Yeah.
to his kingdom. So does that sort of open the door to, we're in
Hmm.
enemy territory and
Okay.
anything goes.
What do you think? That's called the Socratic method. Just flip it right back
Flip
on
it
them.
right back.
Yeah.
It's like self-preservation. You want to live, you want to survive.
Yeah.
And so that's sort of what,
Yeah.
that's really what we're in the world. We're trying
Right.
to survive. We gotta persevere. We gotta carry on.
So do you think that would mean survival by any means?
Well, that was your question. I think you'd have to wait.
Right.
Am I going to be a stumbling block to the next guy, or is the next guy
Right.
going to see this as, well, that was the best plan we could go with.
Right.
You can take both sides to
Right.
say, well, no, you're a stumbling block.
Yep.
So.
I
who
struggled
knows?
with this part too,
Okay.
because at the beginning, they talk about how they were tricked into actually coming,
Mhm.
right? And so, but the struggle that I have is then, do we as people be like them? Because we're called to be different,
Okay.
right? And to be virtuous.
Yeah.
But I see no other way out for them.
Right. Right.
And so is it God's will that that's how they're supposed to get through their problem? So
Mhm.
that was the struggle for me,
Certainly
is
the
that
authors will.
the struggle for me, that was the struggle for me, is that, well, they did it first, but
Right.
clearly that's
Right,
never
right.
an argument when you're have kids.
Right.
They did
Yeah,
it
yeah.
first.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But
So he certainly hasn't created a rule for us, and not even in like mere Christianity was there a sense of rule. He described the virtues. And again, these are the right kinds of stories because they tell us some stuff. They communicate some wisdom to us, but it's limited, it's contextual, and it's not simple, right? Like reading through Lord of the Rings, there's always questions, right? Reading through these books, there's always questions. What is proper? And there are times when they discuss that. When we get to Voyage of the Dawn Treader, Reepicheep is almost the embodiment of chivalry, of the knight and the code. And chivalry simply means just behavior. And for him, he's a small mouse with one sword, but there's no backing off. There's no running away. There's no, our honor is in question. Why would we ever go the other way? Why would we not stand up? And there's debate, and there's times when reap it cheap is right, and I'd like to kick the mouse, but we're gonna do it that way because he's made his case, and this is the virtuous way. And there's other points where they say, so I reap, but we are going and you are coming with us. And, right, so, yeah, again, these are the right kinds of books because different situations are going to call out different needs. And kind of like Ecclesiastes, there is a time for everything, time to stand, a time to flee. And somewhere in there is some sort of collective wisdom that will help us make the decision. And Aslan has been named, so we could say that this is done with the context of prayer and invitation as well, assuming that these folks aren't blaspheming the name of Aslan as they invoke it. You just thought you were reading a story, hey?
Jenna has given me a companion book that I've been kind of reading with it.
By
And so
Paul
they
Ford?
talk- Pardon?
By Paul Ford?
Yeah, no, Christian Ditchfield.
Okay, yeah.
And so they talk about it and they say that even though they were outwitting, that they were doing it without conflict. And then they make reference to the fact that that's the kind of wisdom that Jesus talks about in Matthew 10, saying that we're going out as sheeps into the wolves, but be wise as serpents and be harmless as doves.
Good, thank you. Excellent contribution. Could you hold up that book for everybody? Lovely. Okay. Very helpful, thank you. So Shasta doesn't trust grown-ups. We've talked about that a little bit. What might Lewis be saying to grown-ups? What might Lewis be saying to children? So first of all, just to rehearse, Shasta doesn't say anything because his experience with the adults is that they will always spoil or stop whatever you were trying to do. So there's a lack of trust there. Adults are viewed as fun wreckers. And of course, there's some crisis that, adults might be reading this and saying, oh, what would happen if Shasta would just come clean? Who he is, what he was doing, what the plans were. How would the story have progressed from here? What happened?
Does it also speak towards like building relationship to build that trust? So we've talked about Shasta being a street kid. That's a typical response to not necessarily trust the people around and the need to build those relationships. So maybe it's that reminder to kids that, say not all adults are fun killers.
Right.
And that reminder to adults that, we're there to mold them and to build that relationship.
Right. So to some degree, Shasta views adults through the lens of his adopted father, right? Who's unkind, treats him like a slave, would be untrustworthy. I mean, if you were going to have any morsel of yourself, it had to be away from that man, right? But I think Lewis is speaking into a context as well. What were the adults like that he grew up with? What were the adults like around him? How do children today view adults? Are we trustworthy? Are we seen as helpful? Or are we seen as people who just want to take away and limit and impose? So I think there's some talking to the adults. I think there's some talking to kids, because I think a child could read this who hasn't grown up with a parent quite as bad as Shasta did. I would say, oh, why wouldn't he have told them? Maybe he could have gone along, or maybe they would have stayed and helped. Maybe. Who knows?
Or maybe he would have gotten his ears boxed in like he did with
Maybe.
the guard for speaking out of turn.
Yeah. So it's not, by no means am I trying to villainize Shasta, but I think that, as we read our books with our kids, the right books, there may be things for us to consider as well. Who are we? How are we being seen in our own stories?
I know when I was reading that part, I really wanted him to tell them, but I also wanted them to have a good reaction, like to care for him.
Right. Well, and there's some indications that they probably would have when Mr. Tumnus says he's obviously sunstroked. They immediately stop chastising him and badgering him, and they put him to bed and they bring him things to eat. They make sure he's comfortable. They start to take care of his needs. Everything else is put aside. So there's some indications in my mind that he's with the kind of people that are maybe different than the kind of people he grew up with. But sometimes it's hard to overcome that childhood trauma. For
Yep.
sure. And why would the prince be angry at the suggestion that he might not tell the truth? It's on the last page of the chapter. It'll be no good with all those bruises and black eye. I'll just have to tell them the truth once I'm safely away. What else did you think I'd be telling them? Asked the prince with rather an angry look. And who are you? Well, just since time is ticking, let me say there's honor, right? And especially in this point, your word is all you have. Right? So it's honorable. You tell the truth. Truth telling is a virtue. And this is one of the places where we begin to distinguish between the subterfuge to get out safely and protect the queen, and the need to be truthful about oneself and what one is doing and taking the consequences of what comes. Shasta assumes, and this is where his class is one of his blind spots, he assumes that Prince Corn would naturally want to lie to get away with his being out all night and the getting in trouble. But Corn has no intention of trying to avoid trouble. He's going to tell his story the same way he's told Shasta, and he knows that there will be consequences for what he did. And he's perfectly all right with that, because that is part of the good ordered world and his own development in it. Again, similar to the way Shasta thinks about Aravis, Shasta doesn't have insight into that upbringing and that kind of world.
You do have to remember that Shasta's world, the animals take better care of the children than the humans do.
Sorry,
The animals are taking better care of the children than the humans do.
okay.
I mean, in my mind, there's a whole
Then maybe
question
it's
about why
Narnian
on earth,
humans?
well, why did the Queen come to this town anyway, or city in the first place? If she's mildly attracted to this young man that she doesn't know anything about, and she comes, I mean, she's put herself in a very dangerous position. So I don't think the kids would be inclined to trust adults who do that kind of thing. I think they would be more inclined to think that probably the horse has better advice.
I would think part of the reason that the kings and queens are in Calormen is because they're building diplomatic relationships with another nation, and Rabadash's interest is part of that. And as they say, he had a completely different face when he visited, right? So this is a return of a visit of state. But you're right. I mean, it does lead to a fairly precarious situation. So chapter 6, 7, and 8, we have Shasta among the tombs, Erebus and Tashban, and in the house of the Tisroc. The only other thing I want to say about this book, in that chapter in particularly, Shasta and Korn look at each other and they become friends. Friendship is in itself a virtue, and is really important in Renaissance medieval literature. The friendship of Erebus and Shasta, Bree and Wynne, friendship between Korn and Shasta. These are all important themes. Friendship is important. And it's something that we lose sight of a lot of times. We kind of pick our besties and all that kind of stuff, but friendship is something much deeper in this older kind of literature. So
He also Lewis draws the parallel that he looks just like me. Well,
yes,
I'm like the mirror, I'm looking in the mirror. So
yeah,
is that pulling in the whole aspect of, well, you can tell them because they look just like you.
right. Yes. Yeah,
A
yeah.
little bit of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, for sure. And this is another person my age. Yeah, so this isn't an adult for sure. Shasta's doubt at the tombs that they may have taken off without him tells us something more about his upbringing and his character as a result. The cat, I think if we're looking at pieces of Lewis's idea of the Trinity, I think the cat is the comforting presence of the Holy Spirit, largely invisible, largely to his back, largely as a warm presence, not really an interaction. So I think this is a bit of a theology of the Spirit.
Is he implying that the Holy Spirit is less than the Father and Son?
No,
Because
no.
it seems to me there should be three lines.
And this is a lion. So the cat and the lion are one. And we see that at one point when the jackals are trying to harass Shasta, the lion is protecting him again as a presence between the jackals and Shasta. But then when it comes to Shasta, he closes his eyes thinking I'm dead, and it shrinks and it's the cat again at his back. So no, I don't think Lewis has a theology that the Spirit is less than, but he does see the Spirit as distinct. And again, even in our theological articulations of Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, there is something more numinous about the Spirit. And even as the doctrine of the Trinity developed historically, initially it was a duality. It was the Father and the Son. And then it continued to develop to Father, Son, and Spirit. So if you ever want to read about that, I can hook you up. We have the cat scratching Shasta, sense of justice in that. Eye for an eye, you threw rocks at a cat, you get a nice scratch. And again, this points to this cat being more than just a cat. And we had Ervis and Tashban. We certainly get a deeper look at Ervis's character by contrasting it with her friend Lasaraline. There's two different desires for beauty. What is good? And I think we're being forced to conclude one is better than the other. And again, Ervis's determination to wait for Shasta, again, informs us about her character. And it's much better than maybe we would have gotten on first glance from the first interactions and her kind of snobbishness. And again, friendship is at play in all of that. And then House of Tisrock, get Rapidash. It's important to pay attention to his character. And again, pride is playing out for him as well. And it's interesting to note the differences between the royal family of the Tisrock's house and the royal family of Narnia's house. Real different character. And so part of that, again, is thinking about where does the difference in that character come from? So that's the first 8 chapters of The Horse and His Boy. Fun little story. I'll stop the video and then we can pray.